Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us today for this panel. It promises to be a very interesting discussion on security. Security has one thing in common with almost everybody. Everybody hates it. Developers hate it. Users hate it, especially mobile users hate it. But, real world, bad guys are getting smarter. Systems are getting more powerful so they can be even smarter with those systems. So, bottom line is that security has to get tougher. So how do you do that in a frictionless way for both developers and for users? And that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. So with that, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll get started. Kapil?
All right. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kapil Lohia. I'm part of CA. I'm part of our API management business unit. But my role is to really help build solutions with our API management products. And I do a lot of work with our security business unit to sort of combine the synergies of our API management and security solutions together.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rich Lebofsky. I'm head of the financial services team at Samsung SDS America. And been with Samsung for about 2.5 years, and we're focused on digital identity solutions in our group, serving primarily the financial services industry. Samsung, I'll talk a little bit more about our group in general as we get into the discussion.
Thanks. My name is Andrew Shikiar. I lead marketing at a group called FIDO Alliance. FIDO is a consortium of companies working together to create solutions for simpler, stronger authentication. We'll dig into that a little bit further on in the panel. One thing that we see at FIDO is that, as Bill said, no one really likes security, no one really likes passwords. So we're trying to rid the industry of that problem.
I'm Ron Kozman. I work for Thomson Reuters in the San Francisco Bay Area. Now that all of you know about my travel habits to New York, flying coach and everything. Sorry about that. I help manage our mobile app catalog for Thomson Reuters. It's about 50, 60 mobile apps. I also handle governance. And I also try to work across the various product teams to try to drive common technology, best practices, things like that, including trying to get rid of passwords. Gautam?
Gautam Chowcharia. I lead the digital security in CCB. CCB is the consumer-facing side of the bank. That's where all external customer authentication is. And a funny example here is my first name is spelled wrong, and the tougher part is spelled right. That's what passwords do to us. So looking forward to the discussion. No, it's fine.
You'd be calling the help desk at this point.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. So let's start with FIDO. So we know that it's not a dog now. So can you give us a pretty good description of overall of FIDO Alliance?
Yeah.
What it is, the goal, the members, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So FIDO Alliance is a consortium of 250-something companies working together to create solutions for simpler, stronger authentication, as I said before. Ultimately, we're trying to reduce the industry's reliance on passwords. We give talks all over the world, I give talks all over the world, and not once when I ask the question, who likes passwords, has anyone jumped up and down, waving their arms, saying, yes, I like them. And ultimately, as an end user, we can all relate to the challenge associated with it. As we said on mobile, it's even more pervasive. Trying to fat finger something on a screen that while you're walking is next to impossible. So we're trying to both make the user experience better, but also a stronger user experience. Part of the problem with password-based authentication is that users default to either the easiest thing, which is a simple password that they're going to reuse over and over again, or the enterprise or the service provider. If you make the password requirements too difficult, the user either won't use it, won't log into the service. And when I talk to some of our merchant members inside of FIDO, they talk about some of their biggest challenges are shopping cart abandonment. Right, so if you are a retailer online, people come into your site on their phone, they put something in the shopping cart. Now's the time to make an impulse buy. Right, but if you don't remember your password or you can't type it in, the shopping cart abandonment challenge is exacerbated. The other big problem with passwords for enterprises, both internally and externally alike, is that passwords are the cause of data breaches, because of the problems I just mentioned. Right, so I think over 80% of the data breaches last year were caused by a weak credential. Right, so when you have a weak credential, that actually exposes the whole enterprise to all sorts of threats. And so FIDO's addressing that challenge by creating standards for both, for simpler, stronger authentication in a couple of ways. One is through the actual approach we take to authenticating users and where the user authenticates. So first and foremost, when you authenticate using FIDO authentication, whether you're using a mobile device or an external key, what we call a FIDO security key, it's typically a USB key, you're authenticating locally to that device. So you're establishing a private key at the device and the public key is stored in the server, but all of your authentication credentials are stored in the device, they never leave the device. Now, that's a very important thing to understand, because when you look at some of these big data breaches that happen, like say the Yahoo data breach, right? I was exposed to the Yahoo data breach. In fact, I think everybody was.
Yes.
But I have no valuable information on Yahoo. Right? The worst thing someone could do is mismanage my fantasy football team worse than I am already. Right? But the real risk is that they'll take my username and password and then they'll try stuffing it. Right? I read somewhere, I think 3% of authentication attempts are actually stuffed credentials, where someone's taking your username, your password from another site and trying to put it into a third party. That's the real risk of central credentialing, centrally storing authentication credentials, and that's the attack vector that we're essentially eliminating. So that's a little bit about our approach. So the way we do this is we create specifications, right? So the companies collaborate to create specifications. So both CA and Samsung SDS are FIDO members. They take partner activities. Then we certify specifications, because I like to say that specifications by themselves are like one hand clapping, right? There's specs out there, but who cares, right? Once you certify them, and you can see that things interoperate, then all of a sudden you can build an ecosystem. And that ecosystem has really exploded. We have over 300 FIDO certified products on market today, including those from Samsung SDS, that allow service providers like Thomson Reuters to actually roll out FIDO-based solutions with a variety of solutions providers. A little bit more about our membership. We have a board of directors comprised of 36 different companies. It's really a who's who of companies in finance, mobile communications, and IT, and IT platforms. So Google, Microsoft, NTT Docomo, Bank of America, Aetna. So we have a good mix of relying parties, and also chipset vendors like Intel and Qualcomm, Samsung Electronics, all work together to kind of steer this thing forward for the industry at large.
Great, and you mentioned that Samsung was a member. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Samsung's been an early member of the FIDO Alliance, both Samsung Electronics, as Andrew mentioned, and also Samsung SDS. So most people think of Samsung, they think of mobile devices and displays and things like that. Most people don't know that we have about a $9 billion software services and solutions business, and that's where my team and I live. But we saw a lot of value in the FIDO standard, and sort of challenging the traditional server-side type of modality that was used for traditional biometrics and storing by those credentials on servers. So we were very early members of the Alliance, and obviously we've built a platform that is FIDO compliant, SDK-based, and working with a variety of different companies on addressing the problems that was outlined before with respect to password management. Thomson Reuters is one of our clients. In fact, we issued a press release today announcing that partnership. Very excited to be working with TR to help them address some of their challenges.
Great, so I'm going to stay with you two for just 1 minute, then we'll get to you guys, don't worry. So can you talk a little bit about the differences between enterprise grade and consumer grade biometrics, since we're talking essentially a lot of biometrics there?
Yeah, so when we think about things like Touch ID, I think of Touch ID, Face ID, local Android-based biometric authentication. Our take on that is that it's really more about convenience than it is about security, right? It's enabling a user to, instead of using a password or a swipe, they're using a biometric to authenticate. Typically at the device layer, yes, you have companies that are using simple login use cases for Touch ID, but that all resides within the device. When you look at a FIDO-based solution like ours, NextSign, and any FIDO solution, it's based on public key cryptography. You're creating a private key and a public key. You're storing you're encrypting all the elements, including the biometric template, on the device itself, using the highest form of security on the device. You're storing the private key and the biometric template on the device, and those never leave the device, and that's a fundamental tenet of the FIDO standard. And then you've got a public key that gets sent to a server, typically sitting behind the firewall of the financial institution or any enterprise for that matter. And so then every time an authentication request happens, there has to be a successful handshake between the private key and the public key for that user to authenticate. So we would talk about that model as more than just convenience, but really providing an additional layer of security. And so we categorize that as enterprise-grade biometrics versus the things that you get resident on devices mostly for convenience, which we would call consumer-grade biometrics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a perfect description and a contrast between the two. It's remarkable how widely the number of devices that support have biometric authentication in them. So I think Touch ID and now that Face ID has really done the industry a huge service by getting users acclimated to this, and this becomes kind of the baseline expectation for someone as they're buying a mobile device. And before long, every smartphone on market will have biometric authentication. So that's a good starting point for what we did call consumer-grade biometrics. But what we consider to be enterprise-grade biometrics, we also call crypto-based biometrics, where there's some level of cryptography associated with the biometric authentication, with the biometric storage, or we call it high-assurance biometrics, high-assurance authentication, which again follows the same model.
Gotcha. So following along those same lines with the biometric side, I suspect this is where you're going to go with the answer, but what are some of the bigger mobile attack vectors that you're seeing today, and what is Thomson Reuters doing to address that?
So the primary one that we concern ourselves with right now, and certainly the highest in terms of our call center volume, is around password resets. And to your point, we have a number of different entitlement systems within Thomson Reuters. We're a company built through acquisition, like many other companies are, and so we wind up with a lot of different entitlement systems for people to get into their various apps, and people use the same password across those apps, so the stuffing problem becomes a big issue. We're concerned about the social engineering aspect of it. Somebody calling up and presenting themselves as, "Hi, I'm Andrew, and I want to get into I've lost my account. I've already hacked into your Yahoo account. Send me the new password. Now I have access to all of your sensitive portfolio management information in one of our mobile apps, or all of your tax information in one of our mobile apps, or all of your case research in one of our mobile apps." So to that end, we're looking to strengthen that authentication and remove the password. Other attack vectors that we concern about, again, along the same lines of getting, you've probably noticed these unauthorized app stores that are popping up throughout the internet, kind of like weeds, right? Seeing those, we have unauthorized versions of your apps sitting there in the app store, and you're like, what are they doing? Apart from the copyright infringement aspects of it, there's also the fact that these are older vintage apps, and who knows, maybe one of your customers sees it, downloads it, tries to put it in there, and there's malware or some other phishing attempt going on. They gain access to the code, boom, they're off to the races. And then, of course, again, we have about 50 or 60 mobile apps across our company. We often joke that we're kind of like the federal government. We're very good at starting programs, not so good at retiring them. And so some of these apps, like the flagship apps that we do, we develop those ourselves. So we control the architecture, we control what's going on. A great many of them also are done for cost or for convenience reasons by third parties. And so it certainly keeps us up late at night, kind of concerning to make sure they have the same level of care and concern and governance. So the lesson there is pick your partners carefully.
That makes sense. So Gotham, kind of the same question. You're clearly an expert in the financial industry when it comes to identity and security. What are some of the attack vectors you're seeing specific to your industry, and what are you doing about it? So that you're allowed to talk about.
Absolutely. So Ron did a great job, left very little. But just to add to that, from the financial side, yes, ATO, account takeovers and password guessing, these are all issues that we see, but over and above the customer inconvenience of picking up the phone, calling to do the password reset, is a fraud element of it. And the actual end customer facing the brunt of it is really a bad customer experience, even to the cost of even keeping that customer in-house. Because if it's not their fault and somehow the account was taken over, there is no reason that they should be penalized. And that is another thing which, at least in the financial services, account takeover, specifically with credentials like passwords, is becoming more of a pain point. So beyond that, the same issues of inconvenience, it is human tendency to copy the same password, whether we put it on a paper or whether we use the same password on my financial app, is the same on my Gmail and my Yahoo. So one lack the portability of that password because of losing it on one website is what really causes the pain of this entire life cycle, even leading to financial losses. And that's real. It's not a story, it's very real.
Right. Which ties into what you were saying before about Yahoo and everybody being affected.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one thing about, whether you're using biometrics or a second factor, FIDO key, I mean, it actually allows you to be a little more simple with your password if you're using biometrics as a second factor, right? So if someone spoofs my password, but I still need to validate it with the biometric authentication, that gives it added level of protection.
Right.
User.
The portability aspect of it, because stealing my thumb is much more difficult than stealing a password from Yahoo.
One would hope, yeah.
As long as you have the additional, credential, which is stronger, and I think that's what makes it stronger.
And multi-factor auth clearly would make that stronger, but today people are still kind of stuck on the single factor, and getting away from passwords like you were describing really today generally means biometrics. So we know there's some positive aspects to biometrics, but I'm going to be the naysayer for just a second. What are the negative sides? I know they're out there.
From the financial services side, non-repudiation is critical in terms of making sure that the person who did the transaction is who they say they are. But it's very common, like I have my kid's fingerprints on my phone. Whether it's me or my son who ordered that $1,000 device, it's very difficult from a financial services perspective to go back to. So those are the weaknesses, even when combined, like the consumer grade biometrics that's available today, it's very difficult to tie it back to an end user. So non-repudiation is one of the primary weaknesses that I see in how we use that. There are, of course, methods to overcome that, but pure vanilla biometrics, how do I know whose fingerprint was it? Other than the fact that, yes, it was valid to unlock that phone.
Another challenge too is the user experience, kind of like what you were talking about when there's a hack and the user, through no fault of their own, has to suffer. You don't want that. Okay, so now we're going to be rolling out biometrics. To some people that might be Big Brother. They're also, how do I do this? How do I hold it? How do I do this successfully without screwing it all up? Plus the technology is still evolving too. If you're using facial recognition and there's bright lights, sometimes that tends to require a little bit of extra work to go get it to work. So, we're working hard on proof of concepts with some of our lead customers to help get them sensitized to this, get them used to it. And as time goes by, hopefully that'll also get reduced also.
Gotcha. Anything to add? Nope.
No,
Okay.
I'm good. I'm good.
So
Actually, it's funny.
oh, go ahead.
I can hear Eric better than I can hear Ron for some reason. I don't know what it is. I'm hoping you guys can hear us properly, but it's hard to hear Eric from over here. But anyways, I'll add on later on.
Okay. So sticking with mobile devices, obviously, one of the big fads I'm hoping has died off a little bit, but I suspect it hasn't. You guys would know this more than I, is rooting your device to get access to something else that the manufacturers' app stores won't give you. So how do you protect those types of devices, assuming they've been rooted? And more importantly, especially from a banking or a commercial app perspective, how do you trust that device?
So in financial services, it's a very simple answer. It's a business decision. Is it worth taking the risk? Would I want a rooted device to be used for $1 million transfer? It's not worth it, so we won't allow it. It's not a matter of a subjective question. It's more about the risk and a business decision. The technology does provide us the capability of knowing whether it's rooted or jailbroken. And to that point, will I stop that particular device from looking at a balance? In my opinion, no. But would I allow that particular device to transfer monies, which I think is not in the normal behavior pattern? Absolutely not. And that's pure common sense. So that's the approach which at least I'm seeing more over in different financial firms as well. So we don't stop rooted and jailbroken devices, because if you go outside the states, the ratio of rooted and jailbroken devices are phenomenal. Like, it's normal to have a rooted or jailbroken device, not the other way around. So just to block access because you're rooted may not be, it may be risky, but it may not be appropriate from a customer access perspective. But if you're trying to do any kind of financial transaction and it's a rooted device, there's absolutely no reason to take that risk, in my opinion.
Agreed. And there's every now and then rulemaking comes into play to help out, right? This spring we're going to have GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. It's going to take effect in the European Union. Last year, the IRS released requirements for authentication as well.
Right.
And so I think those are all very good reasons, compelling reasons to start having kind of a management policy that says, no, we're not going to allow this. And certainly on our flagship products, that's a no-no. No question about it.
Makes sense. And then for you too, also, since you're on the consumer side, for mobile security testing, is that built into your life cycle, or what do you guys do for that? Clearly, I suspect.
And how? Yes, go ahead. You want to,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you can't even get into the app to do the testing without going through the security. So, but what we've done is, what I've heard, the general framework was security is painful, security is a headache, it's an afterthought, but we do have these business priorities saying security from the start, but nobody does anything about it, right? It's good on the paper and on the policies. So what we are trying to do is to make security as part, even though it's a hackneyed word, but as a service. So while you're doing the testing, all of this is embedded within the flows, and it's tested continuously. It is not on a cycle per basis or on a release basis, but it's a continuous test environment which has to be done on a proactive basis as well, right? Other than following the feeds from anywhere else that comes along, tells you about a new vulnerability that you don't know, but on a proactive basis that you may find something that you think is not right. So absolutely, it's part of our process on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I run governance for the mobile app catalog, and certainly we become big hawks on that. We mandate scans on a regular basis every 4 months. We're a Veracode house. We also, again, GDPR has another nice benefit, and that's the privacy and security by design, right? These are all things that we should be doing anyway, but the fact is there's lawmaking coming in 6.5 months that's going to make that an absolute requirement for everybody that's doing business across the world. So yeah, we're definitely, the governance process, in years past, we tended to be a little more, okay, you're too busy, okay, well, you get the scan next release, okay, we won't worry about it, but not anymore.
Not anymore.
Now, along those lines, I'm just curious, Andrew, does FIDO have a best practices model that they use for security testing, or recommendations rather?
Yeah, I mean, so we have a couple of things that we do. So I mentioned FIDO Certified before, so we certify for interoperability. We're launching something very soon called security level certification, which will actually give gradient levels of score, if you will, on the authenticator according to what type of authentication it does. So when all these start beyond what we call consumer biometrics, all these start at the enterprise level, but if it's hardware backed, for example, if it's in a secure element, unique chipset, scaling up to, can it protect against brute force attacks? So we have a certification program against, for security specifically, emerging very soon. But you mentioned GDPR. Another big focus area for us is actually policy and privacy. So we have privacy guidelines as well, which ties back to what I was leading with before about how we keep user credentials on the device. Right? So those privacy guidelines are very important for companies to follow if they want to adhere to things like GDPR, if they want to provide best practices for their customers.
I'll just say from the solution provider perspective, we've done things like common criteria certification, which is a government certification that they take your software, they put it through a whole round of testing, and then if you pass all of those criteria, then you get that common criteria certification, which enables you to then be able to sell to the government. We're looking at things like FIPS compliance as well. So we're continuously looking at ways to enhance the security profile of the software.
That's great. Actually, a quick plug, our API Gateway solution today got our common criteria certification renewed, so we were very happy about that.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. So glad you mentioned that.
I thought I'd get
I was going to bring it up, but yeah, absolutely.
And this is for the entire panel. Dealing with security issues is overwhelming and it's just snowballing. How are you guys keeping up to date with the latest known mobile security vulnerabilities?
I'll start. I just talked to these guys. That's my approach is to no. Look, seriously, I think having discussions with sort of your peers is a very good way. But of course, you hear about all the everything that's happening in the news almost right away. But having the network of peers and what they're doing and how they're resolving issues, there's sometimes no simple answer, right? So you have to discuss, and there's also, what I mean by that is it's a trade-off, right? What do you allow from a customer experience perspective, and what friction do you put in around that? So you have to balance that, and you have to discuss, how are others doing it? What are the other approaches to take to have that balance between a great experience but great security, right? But others?
Yeah, I mean, just from a product development standpoint, we have a dedicated security team. Everything has to go through that security team. They're trying to always see where there might be vulnerability in that software before it's going out to any customers. So security for Samsung, security is paramount in everything that we do.
That makes sense.
The type of collaboration that Kapil's talking about is really the essence of how FIDO works. Not just for security vulnerabilities, but establishing best practices, both from a technical standpoint and a policy and legal standpoint for implementing strong authentication. So we have, relying on service providers working together with vendors, talking about what's the best way to move this whole approach moving forward.
Yeah, Kapil's right. I mean, it's all about collaboration. It's also all about, in our governance process, we have a strong partnership with our information security team. And we review architecture constantly. We're reviewing all aspects of these apps. And you're making decisions. You're right. Some of these apps that were built 4 or 5 years ago were a great idea then. Is the risk to reward ratio too high?
Yeah.
Okay, well, then it's time to retire it or go do something different. You're making those choices constantly.
So I agree with Kapil. There is no finite answer or a correct answer for this because it's a problem. There is no consortium where people can talk about these issues openly, right? That is a problem. We rely on peer conversations, news from the internet, most of which is reactory, right? And then you have your internal processes which can do proactive testing, but then that's limited compared to having some kind of a format where these vulnerabilities and the exposure that they bring along is shared in a positive way. Nobody is asking to say whether you're vulnerable or not, but this, I think in security, is a problem statement. Yeah. There is no common forum in terms of, hey, this is the vulnerability and what we are doing to solve it together, rather than keeping it secret or making it compliant or doing something where you're not in the limelight. That's what I see, and that's a personal opinion. That's what I see. And you're on vacation and maybe the peer is not there. That should not be the reason why you're not on top of it. But unfortunately, there isn't anything that one place go to shop and then you can see, hey, this is what exists and you are up to date with it. No. Yeah. And it's so rapid. These things are so rapid, like these things change minute by minute, and keeping on top of it is painful.
And I'll add 2 things. First of all, along that, I mean, for us to keep the bad guys out, we have to think of every possible thing that could be vulnerability in there. They just have to find one weak point, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So they find that one weak point, they can tell the world, or the whole world can exploit it, but we have to think of every possible thing and be able to react to every possible situation. So that's why collaboration is, and peer groups and things I think are so important, because the reality is, even if we compete, even companies compete with each other, the reality is we're sort of all, we're good guys. We're the good guys, and we have to find a way to keep the bad guys out, and it's in all our best interest to be able to do that, right? So,
sounds good. So I'm going to change this up just a little bit. So we've talked about the endpoint and the value of securing and ensuring ID. And there are technologies out there that to ensure that your data stays secured even if you lose your device. However, if you do lose your device, you can go up to YouTube and see plenty of videos of 10-year-olds showing how to break into an iPhone or Android device. They're out there. A friend of mine explained to me, if you ever want to know anything, just go to YouTube. 10-year-old will show you how. So, so if you do that, and now you have sensitive data, or excuse me, you have auto login or auto auths set up, and I'm sure many people do. I don't think I'm the only one. And now you've lost that device and it potentially can be tracked. What can you do on the back end to ensure that that is really you, who you say you are? I'll turn to Kapil for this one.
Oh, yeah. That's always a fun one, right? Like, first of all, I'd go to the video and see what the 10-year-old would do to solve the problem also. No, I'm kidding. But look, I'm going to go back to multiple things. First of all, I don't use auto login for anything, so I would not recommend that to anyone. But hey, people like it. People will use it. You know, at least give me my. If I go into my account, show me my before I log in. Show me my balances or things like that. So again, this is a first of all from a from a user perspective, what are you comfortable with, and what level of security of friction you want to put up with. But from a app developer enterprise perspective, I think again you have to look at those possibilities that happen, and evaluate the risk benefit associated with each of those. And then there's many technologies available to protect against things like that, and certainly keeping the information secure on the device, right? Not just keeping it alone, keeping it secure. Third, if you do allow something like an auto login to happen, to make sure you have policies in the way which sort of track potentially behavior, right? Is this a normal behavior for the user to be doing, or is this something, or they're accessing the phone from a different location, or they're trying to make a transaction which is completely out of character, right? So if someone's stolen the phone, jailbroken it, and figure out how to get into your account, hopefully you've got some protection in the back end to say, well, that does not look like normal behavior. I'm going to request a multi-factor authentication. I'm going to request some other form of verification here. So I think in the back end, you can do those things. Of course, there's other things, right? And we talk about this, we talk about sort of this three-way trust that you establish, right? Where you trust the identity, but you also trust the device and the application. And if you can sort of trust that around the contextual information, as I'll add to that, and tie it back to the information you keep around the context of use, I think that's sort of the approach I would suggest. And again, there'll always be, if you completely make it impossible for people to, there's always a small amount of risk you have to take to allow the experience to happen, right? So
when you're saying that doesn't look like normal behavior, it's something along the lines of a backend system triggering a one-time password SMS or something along those lines?
Yeah, so do an evaluation. This does not look like normal behavior, so we still have sort of risk evaluation of what's happening, or against the profile, or some sort of rule-based risk evaluation. And then, yeah, you can trigger a one-time password or some sort of push notification to the app, if you trust it. That's the question.
Yeah, that goes
if
back
you
to the
trust it. If you trust it.
And just to add to that, just wanted to add to it, right? So the question is, somebody stole your device, what do you have in the back end to protect it? So from my opinion, anything which is that portable should not be trusted completely.
Yes.
You should always have some parts of the source in the back end that even if it's stolen, you can't authenticate, auto login or no login otherwise. And on top of it, whatever Kapil mentioned in terms of behavioral or other metrics that you know about it, whether the transaction profiling or anything else that will add to additional level of assurance that the person behind the phone is the person who they say they are, right? But never add all the sources in one area that once you lose it all. Right? So there are these technologies on the back end which you combine with what's on the client, right? Without going into the deeper, making it dull in the afternoon session, but essentially there is always pieces available in cryptography where only one part of the client is authenticated, the other side is not. So even if you steal it, you can't log in.
And to that point, if you look at the way the FIDO architecture is built with a public key sitting on a server behind a firewall, if a device is lost or stolen, one thing that could be done is you go to the server, you deregister the device, right, on the back end. So you do, to that point, you do have some capability on the back end either to eliminate the public key, so there's no way for that match to happen between the private key and the public key, or just simply deregister the device from the back end. So there's ways to do that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that behavioral is another form of biometrics that comes into play, right? So we just made an announcement about a partnership that we're working with a company that provides behavioral, and if you think about that sort of a continuous monitoring effect, it's not only looking at the way you type or the way you hold your device, but it's also looking for imposters, for change of IP address, for example, and that's more of a continuous monitoring capability. So when you marry that with a FIDO component, which I would think of as an intermittent type of authentication happening on challenge, right? You combine those two things, now you have an even more compelling solution.
Very good. So we have some very strong panelists up here with good opinions, as you may have noticed. If you have any questions for them, there is a microphone set up. You're more than welcome to ask. I only have one more here, and then we'll take questions from the audience. And my last question is really to Gautam. I know you can't talk about your bank specifically, but in the banking industry in general, following on what we were just talking about with Kapil, what kinds of back-end double checks do you make, and when do you make them for that device? Is it always, or is it only when a certain trigger happens, or how do you typically see that working?
So the best way to answer that for the banking industry is everything.
Yes.
It's literally everything. So whether it's login, whether it's event, whether it's a particular risky transaction, what we deal with is not authentication and tracking and evaluation. What we are dealing with is how do you have a continuous authentication which is not invasive. So the customer doesn't know that there is an authentication going on behind the scenes, and at that point it doesn't matter whether it's an event based, it's for the whole session, but I'm following the customer for that whole session without the customer knowing about it. And as long as it's not causing friction, the customer really doesn't care. In fact, security becomes a business enabler at that point. Because of this continuous authentication, you can offer more features and services. That's what I think the banking industry is doing. But as far as policies and evaluation, it's everything. From transaction to events, to high-risk events, to login, to reset, there's nothing left in terms of evaluation.
Great.
Behavioral, so everything is there in the industry.
That makes total sense, especially in your industry. Do you guys, there's no questions yet from the audience. Do you guys have any closing
there are a
comments you'd
couple
like to make?
questions.
Oh, there was one?
Yeah, please come on
Yes,
up.
there's a microphone up there.
Yeah, hi. I actually have a bunch of questions, so I'll keep you
good.
busy, guys.
Keep-
All right, I'll start with the first. We released more than 4,000 mobile apps, banking apps, okay? And I totally agree with the value of FIDO and how added security with the public-private key, would make it much harder to hack into a device, especially with biometric and passwords. But I do have a few questions. The first is, as a company that create banking or mobile applications and use what comes out of from Apple, operating system and Google operating system, what is the reason of not waiting, for example, like if you guys are aware, like is Apple going to be at one point saying that, hey, we're improving our Face ID or Touch ID to be FIDO compliant, or would Google do that? And that's number one. It becomes really a waiting game, right? Do you want to get into it now? Or do you want to wait and see if Apple will do it, or Google will do it, or Samsung will make it part of Samsung devices? So I just wanted to see if you guys have any opinions about that. I can ask my other questions, or I can wait.
Well, let's do them one at a time.
yeah.
Okay, one at a time.
So from my perspective as a person with a large app catalog, again, we've got some flagship apps with some fairly sensitive information. So I'm not inclined to wait. I'm inclined to act. If you have a hack, it's going to be small consolation when your front page news that, well, we were just waiting for Google or for Apple to implement something better. That's not going to wash. So we're going to move forward.
Yeah, from my perspective, with a FIDO solution, you have this server element, right? So to think about putting that type of model in a device that's millions of devices out there into consumers' hands, who's managing that server, right? So I don't necessarily see that happening anytime soon, at least in the US, but there are examples of it. For example, Samsung Pay in Korea uses the entire FIDO infrastructure because of the regulatory environment in South Korea. Banks weren't willing to take the liability, so Samsung had to step up and do that. Here in the US, it's not deployed with an entire FIDO infrastructure because of the differences in regulations here. So I think it'll be some time before you see that type of model deployed on a mass level from device manufacturers like Samsung or Apple.
So I think the answer is don't wait, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, a couple comments
right,
on
don't wait, that's
specific to FIDO. So, so Apple's not a member of FIDO, and Google certainly is. Google's one of the key backers of FIDO, and a couple things are happening to help align these stars for companies like yourself. First of all, the next wave of the FIDO specs is called FIDO 2, and part of that is something called web authentication, which is happening in the W3C, and that is the web platform. All right, so web authentication is nearly done. That will become the default way of doing authentication in any sort of web-based environment. That includes mobile web. Right, so Android is actually evolving to support FIDO APIs explicitly. FIDO's already in every Samsung device that's shipping, but Android's evolving to more explicitly expose the FIDO APIs, and then through W3C, we think we'll have more explicit support in the web platform on Apple. Right now, obviously, you can bundle the FIDO APIs onto an iOS app, and that's what a lot of people are doing. Bank of America, eBay, PayPal, a lot of companies are doing it like that way. And part of the advantage of using FIDO rather than just leveraging the native biometric functionality in the devices is your kind of core standards-based message, right? You're developing to a standards-based infrastructure that can scale across both platforms and also doesn't tie you into the pre-existing modalities. Right, so FIDO doesn't specify modalities. As a new modality comes out on an Android device, you can very easily accept that in your app and service.
That's good.
Thank you. I can keep going until someone else have any other questions.
No, just
Fire away.
Yeah, one more thing to add to that. I don't think there is a lack of technology in terms of whether Google or Apple. It's the regulatory framework and the privacy. Right? Do I want to? Do I want, when I log into my phone, that it should be available to everyone for the sake of interoperability? I don't want interoperability. It's my personal phone. I don't want to have a banking app. And that is that line which needs to be drawn in terms of where and how we do it. That's how I feel about it, right? The technology is there, like FIDO APIs are available. There are other tools available where you can share, and the manufacturer can do that now if they want to. It's not a technology weight game.
Okay, that makes sense. And also to you, Gautam and Ron, in the financial industry, do we really have massive examples of security breaches that happened on a Touch ID or a face identifier within Samsung? Because when you were asked, you answered that password reset probably was you guys have been seeing highest volume, and I agree with you. Banks have been seeing a lot of high volume on it. There are other ways to solve that, but from my perspective is are you aware of massive fraud based on biometric in particular on the Android platform and iPhone platform? And number two is, do you see financial industry moving completely into a passwordless solution? Because even today, with many of the biometric solutions in the market that are also FIDO compliant, it does require that initial authentication to happen at the time when you want to enroll or register your device and get that private key and public key binding in it. And I believe that banks in general and financial industry in general, I'm questioning how ready they are to say, yes, we are completely passwordless.
So I'll start with the last one. So may I, Ron?
Please.
So, and it's a very practical question. We can talk about biometrics, we can talk about all the face IDs and touch IDs, and yes, passwords are insecure. Password reset is a big problem, but is passwords going away in the near future? No. And the question is not whether the banking industry is ready. The banking industry is ready. You can actually have the entire flow without having a password now. Is the consumer ready? Is the consumer ready to have that kind of a flow, right? And is the industry ready to accept it? And that transition is happening slowly. Because I can see that from the other side as well, because you are faced with, you still have people with normal phones, not smartphones, and you have to accommodate a lot of people doing phone banking still. So in that case, how do you go about that authentication without having a modality? It will go away, that transition is happening, but whether it will happen in the next few years, I don't know. That's more of a crystal ball question, but the practicality of it is I don't see passwords going away in the next 2-3 years completely, even though the technology exists today that you can have all of this without the passwords. There is no reason that I cannot re-enroll the phone just because you have a biometric. There are multiple other ways of doing the authentication without the password in getting that. And I forgot the first part of your question.
I'll take a stab at the first question, because your question was, is there any large-scale financial data hacks, right, that using a mobile?
Biometric.
And the answer is none that I'm aware of, although I'm not sure that's necessarily a badge of honor. We have historically tended to limit what you could do on mobile in terms of trading, things like that, for a reason. And that was for exactly that reason. And so, again, it's a business decision where you say, all right, the risk to reward ratio is too high. We're not going to allow you to do this. So, haven't seen one, but I think that's largely because of the fact there was a lot of hesitance to really go all in. Not necessarily because of the protection, although I think the protection is there now. So.
And with that said, unfortunately, we are out of time for this session. If you'd like to discuss more, maybe we can have a little side conversation off to the side here. We definitely would like to get your question answered, but we're having to vacate the stage. But thank you guys very much for joining us today. Thank you guys very much for being on stage today as a member of the panel. So have a good one.
Thank you.